The sleek silver Mercedes came to a sputtering halt, right in front of Marcus's modest auto repair shop, black smoke billowing from under its pristine hood. Marcus wiped his oil-stained hands on his coveralls and looked up from the ancient Ford he'd been working on all morning. The driver's door opened, and out stepped the most elegant woman he'd ever seen. Designer heels clicked against the cracked asphalt as she approached, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the afternoon sunlight. Everything about her screamed wealth and sophistication, from her tailored white blazer to the delicate gold watch adorning her wrist. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice carrying a slight tremor of frustration. "My car just died, right here in front of your shop." Marcus set down his wrench and walked toward her, unconsciously smoothing down his unruly dark hair. "I'm Marcus," he said simply. "Let me take a look." "Elena," she replied, extending a manicured hand that hesitated for just a moment before shaking his grease-stained one. Elena Whitmore. The name hit Marcus like a lightning bolt. Whitmore. Everyone in town knew that name. The family owned half the businesses downtown, including the luxury car dealership, where this Mercedes had probably cost more than Marcus made in 2 years. He popped the hood and immediately winced. The engine was a disaster. Seized pistons, blown gasket, oil everywhere. This wasn't just a breakdown. It was mechanical carnage. "Well?" Elena asked, leaning closer. Her expensive perfume mixed oddly with the scent of motor oil and metal. Marcus shook his head slowly. "Ma'am, I hate to tell you this, but your engine is completely destroyed. This isn't something you fix. This is something you replace." Eleanor's face fell. "But I need my car. I have a board meeting in 3 hours, and my father will absolutely kill me if I'm late to another one." "I'm sorry," Marcus said genuinely. "Even the dealership would take weeks to get parts for this model. Your best bet is calling a tow truck and—" "Wait." Elena's eyes suddenly sparkled with mischief, and a smile played at the corners of her mouth. "You're a mechanic, right? A good one." Marcus nodded cautiously. "Then here's a deal for you," she said, her tone becoming playfully challenging. "Fix this engine, make it run like new, and I'll marry you." Marcus's eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me." Elena laughed, a sound like silver bells. "You heard me. Concerte este motore, eu me caso con você. Fix this engine and I'll marry you, that's my offer." "Ma'am, with all due respect, I don't think you understand what you're asking. This engine is dead, yes, you said that." Eleanor checked her watch again. "But you didn't say impossible. There's a difference, isn't there?" Marcus looked from her confident smile to the destroyed engine and back again. Something in her eyes, a mixture of desperation and genuine curiosity, made him pause. 20 minutes, Elena continued. "That's all the time I can spare. 20 minutes to prove whether you're just another mechanic or if there's something special about Marcus." "What was your last name?" "Rodriguez," he supplied quietly. "Marcus Rodriguez." She tested the name like she was tasting fine wine. 20 minutes, Marcus Rodriguez, what do you say?" Marcus stared at the engine again. Every rational part of his brain screamed that this was impossible, but somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered something different, something about destiny, about moments that change everything. He rolled up his sleeves. "Clock starts now," he said. Marcus moved with a purpose that surprised even himself. He'd worked on thousands of engines, but never with such focused intensity. His hands seemed to know exactly where to go. What to touch, what to repair first. Elena watched from a few feet away, her initial amusement slowly giving way to genuine fascination. She'd expected him to poke around helplessly for 20 minutes before admitting defeat. Instead, she was witnessing something extraordinary. Marcus's movements were fluid, almost choreographed. He dismantled the seized components with surgical precision, his fingers dancing across metal and wire like a pianist playing a complex sonata. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he worked, but his hands never wavered. "How did you learn to do that?" Elena found herself asking. "My grandfather," Marcus replied without looking up, his voice tight with concentration. "He taught me that every engine has a soul. You don't force it. You listen to it. Understand what it needs." 5 minutes in, Marcus had somehow freed the seized pistons. Elena blinked in disbelief. Her father's mechanic at the dealership had told her it would take hours just to assess the damage. 10 minutes in, Marcus was rebuilding the oil circulation system with parts he seemed to pull from thin air. Elena realized he was cannibalizing components from other vehicles in the shop, somehow making them fit perfectly. "This is impossible," she whispered to herself. 15 minutes in, Marcus's movements became almost frantic. He was racing against time now, his entire being focused on this one impossible task. Oil stained his shirt, Sweat dripped from his chin, but his eyes never left the engine. Elena found herself holding her breath. What had started as a silly joke was becoming something else entirely. She was watching a master craftsman perform magic. With 30 seconds left, Marcus stepped back from the engine. His chest heaved with exhaustion and his hands trembled slightly. The engine looked different, not new, but somehow alive again. Well, Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. Marcus looked at her, his dark eyes intense and uncertain. "Turn the key." Elena slid into the driver's seat, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't quite name. She inserted the key with trembling fingers and turned it. The engine roared to life. Not just started, roared. It purred with a power and smoothness that Elena had never heard before, not even when the car was brand new. The dashboard lights glowed steadily, every system showing green. Elena sat in stunned silence for a long moment, listening to the perfect rhythm of the engine. Then she slowly got out of the car and walked back to where Marcus stood, wiping his hands on a rag. 20 minutes, she said softly, checking her watch. Exactly 20 minutes. Marcus nodded, suddenly seeming uncertain about what he'd just accomplished. It should run fine now. Better than before, actually. Elena stared at him, then at the engine, then back at him. For the first time in her privileged life, she was completely speechless. The joke was over, but something much more serious had just begun. Elena stood frozen beside her impossibly repaired car, her mind struggling to process what she'd just witnessed. The engine hummed with a perfection that seemed to defy the laws of physics and mechanics combined. I don't understand," she finally managed to say. "My father's team of mechanics said this engine was completely dead, irreparable. They wanted to sell the car for scrap." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of how he must look, covered in grease, sweating. His old coveralls a stark contrast to her expensive outfit. Sometimes engines just need someone who listens to them differently. Differently. Elena's voice rose slightly. "Marcus, what you just did isn't different. It's miraculous. How is this possible?" Before Marcus could answer, the sound of expensive heels on pavement announced the arrival of Elena's assistant, Sarah, who'd apparently been dispatched to find her. "Miss Whitmore, thank God I found you. Your father is furious that you missed the preliminary meeting. And the board members are asking—" Sarah stopped mid-sentence as she noticed the running car. "Wait, how is your car working? I thought it was completely broken." Eleanor glanced between Sarah and Marcus, something unreadable flickering in her eyes. "Change of plans, Sarah. Tell my father I'll be there in 30 minutes. Not 3 hours. But how did you—" "Just tell him." Elena's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Sarah nodded and hurried back to her own car. Once they were alone again, Elena turned back to Marcus. The playful woman who'd made the marriage joke was gone, replaced by someone more serious, more vulnerable. "I need to ask you something," she said quietly, "and I need you to be completely honest with me." Marcus nodded. "Have we met before? Because there's something about you, about the way you work, that feels familiar." Marcus's hands stilled on the rag he'd been using to clean himself up. "No, ma'am, I'm pretty sure I'd remember meeting someone like you." "Someone like me," Elena repeated, a slight edge creeping into her voice. "You mean someone rich?" "I mean someone unforgettable," Marcus said simply, and the honesty in his voice made Elena's breath catch. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. "About what I said before," Elena began hesitantly, "about the marriage thing, I was just joking, I know." Marcus's voice was carefully neutral. "But you took it seriously." Marcus looked directly at her then, his dark eyes intense. "In my family, we believe words have power, especially promises, even joking ones." Elena felt something flutter in her chest, a sensation she'd never experienced before. "Your family believes in a lot of things, don't they? Engines having souls, words having power." "My family believes in honoring commitments," Marcus said quietly. "Even impossible ones." The flutter in Elena's chest intensified. "Marcus, I can't just—I mean, you understand that I was—" Elena, the way he said her name, soft and careful, stopped her mid-sentence. "I'm not asking you to marry me. I'm not asking you for anything. I fixed your engine because you needed help. And because—" he paused, searching for the right words, "because something told me I could." Elena stared at him, her carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. "Who are you really, Marcus Rodriguez?" Before he could answer, her phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Board meeting moved up. Get here now." "I have to go," Elena said, her voice filled with regret she didn't fully understand. She walked to her car, then paused with her hand on the door handle. "Marcus, yes, thank you, for the engine and for everything." She drove away, leaving Marcus standing in his small shop, wondering why it felt like something momentous had just ended before it could truly begin. But as Elena's car disappeared around the corner, neither of them noticed the elderly man who'd been watching from across the street, a knowing smile on his weathered face. Some promises, he thought to himself, have a way of keeping themselves. 3 days passed and Marcus couldn't stop thinking about Elena Whitmore. He'd thrown himself into his work with renewed intensity, but every time he heard a car engine, he found himself looking up, hoping to see that silver Mercedes again on Thursday afternoon. As he was closing up shop, a vintage Rolls-Royce pulled up outside. Marcus had never seen anything like it. Perfectly maintained, probably worth more than his entire building. An elderly man stepped out, moving with the careful dignity of someone who'd lived a long, full life. He was impeccably dressed in a three-piece suit, his silver hair neatly combed, his eyes sharp and intelligent. "Are you Marcus Rodriguez?" the man asked, his voice carrying a slight accent that Marcus couldn't quite place. "Yes, sir. Can I help you?" The man smiled, and suddenly Marcus saw something familiar in his features. "My name is Eduardo Morales. I believe you know my granddaughter." Marcus's heart skipped. "Elena is your granddaughter." "Indeed, and from what she's told me, you've made quite an impression." Eduardo's eyes twinkled with amusement. "May I come in? I have a story to tell you that I think you'll find very interesting." Marcus led Eduardo into his small office. Clearing papers off a chair, Eduardo sat down carefully, his eyes taking in the modest surroundings with no judgment, only curiosity. "First," Eduardo said, "I must tell you how extraordinary your work was on Elena's car. I've been around engines my entire life, and what you accomplished was remarkable." "Thank you, sir, but Eduardo held up a hand. "Please let me finish, you see, Marcus. I know about engines having souls. My father taught me the same thing your grandfather taught you." Marcus froze. "How do you know about my grandfather?" Eduardo's smile grew wider. "Because 50 years ago, your grandfather and I worked together. We were partners, actually, best friends. We had a small shop not far from here, and we shared everything. Our knowledge, our dreams, our techniques." The room seemed to spin around Marcus. "That's impossible. My grandfather never mentioned a partner named Eduardo Morales. No, I suppose he wouldn't have, you see. We had a falling out, a terrible, stupid falling out over a woman we both loved." Eduardo's voice grew sad. "Your grandfather was the better man. He married Maria and had a beautiful family. I left town in my pride and anger, eventually building my fortune elsewhere. But I never forgot Antonio or the things he taught me." Marcus sat down heavily. "You're saying my grandfather knew Elena's grandfather?" "More than that, my boy. Much more." Eduardo leaned forward. "When I heard Elena's story about the marriage joke, about the impossible engine repair, I knew the technique you used. The way you listened to the engine. That was pure Antonio Rodriguez. The same gift he tried to teach me, though I was never quite good enough to master it." "But Elena's last name is Whitmore," Marcus said, confused. "Elena's mother was my daughter, Carmen Morales. She married Richard Whitmore, took his name, as was expected in their social circle, but Elena carries both bloodlines, the Whitmore business acumen and the Morales mechanical intuition." Marcus felt like the ground was shifting beneath him. "Are you saying that Elena and I are not related, if that's what you're worried about?" Eduardo chuckled. "But connected in ways that go far deeper than blood, your grandfather and I. We were like brothers once. In a different world, we might have been family." Eduardo reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an old photograph. It showed 2 young men standing proudly in front of a small auto shop, their arms around each other's shoulders, huge grins on their faces. Marcus recognized his grandfather immediately. The other man was clearly a young Eduardo Morales. "He kept one too," Eduardo said softly. "I saw it in his obituary photo 2 years ago. I wanted to come to the funeral to pay my respects, but I wasn't sure I'd be welcome. He talked about you," Marcus said suddenly. "Not by name, but he used to tell stories about his old partner, the one who got away. He always said his biggest regret was letting pride come between true friendship." Eduardo's eyes filled with tears. "Antonio said that—" Marcus nodded. "He said some mistakes echo through generations, and the only way to fix them is through love and forgiveness." For a long moment neither man spoke. Then Eduardo cleared his throat and composed himself. "There's something else, Marcus. Something Elena doesn't know yet." Eduardo's voice became serious. "The engine repair you performed, it wasn't just skilled work, the components you used, the modifications you made. You essentially created a hybrid system that shouldn't exist for another 10 years. My engineers have been trying to develop exactly that technology for our manufacturing division. Marcus stared at him. I don't understand. I think you do deep down. You have your grandfather's gift, but enhanced, evolved, and Elena. Eduardo smiled mysteriously. Elena has been searching her whole life for something she couldn't name, something that would make her feel complete. Sir, with all due respect, your granddaughter and I are from completely different worlds. Eduardo stood up, straightening his jacket. Marcus, 50 years ago, I let social differences destroy the most important friendship of my life. I won't let it happen again. He headed toward the door, then paused. Elena will be at the charity gala this Saturday night at the Grand Ballroom. She doesn't know I'm telling you this. Mr. Morales, I can't just show up at some fancy gala. I don't belong in that world. Eduardo turned back, his eyes fierce with determination. You belong wherever your heart tells you to go, young man. And if my granddaughter's reaction to your engine repair is any indication, your heart and hers might just be telling you the same thing. After Eduardo left, Marcus sat alone in his shop, staring at the photograph of his grandfather and Elena's grandfather, their friendship frozen in time. Some promises, he realized, might take 50 years to keep. Saturday evening arrived with the weight of destiny. Marcus stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting the tie of his only suit, a black ensemble he'd worn to his grandfather's funeral 2 years earlier. It wasn't designer, but it was clean and pressed, and it would have to do. His hands shook slightly as he combed his hair. What was he doing? Showing up uninvited to a high society gala where he knew absolutely no one except Elena, who probably thought he was just some mechanic who'd gotten lucky with her engine. But Eduardo's words echoed in his mind. You belong wherever your heart tells you to go. The Grand Ballroom was everything Marcus had expected and more. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over elegantly dressed couples who moved with the practiced grace of people born to privilege. Waiters in white jackets carried trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres that probably cost more than Marcus made in a day. Marcus felt completely out of place, but he pushed through the crowd, searching for a familiar face among the sea of strangers. Then he saw her. Elena stood near the far wall, wearing a stunning midnight blue gown that seemed to capture starlight in its fabric. Her hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, and diamond earrings caught the light when she moved. She was surrounded by a small group of people, board members, probably, or business associates. But even from across the room, Marcus could see that she looked unhappy. Her smile was polite but forced, her posture tense. She was nodding at something a pompous-looking man in his 50s was saying, but her eyes kept drifting toward the windows. Marcus took a deep breath and started walking toward her. Excuse me, he said quietly when he reached the group. Elena turned, and her carefully composed expression shattered into pure shock. Marcus, what are you? How did you? The pompous man frowned at the interruption. I'm sorry, who are you? Marcus Rodriguez, Marcus said, extending his hand with more confidence than he felt. I'm a friend of Elena's. Richard Blackstone, the man replied coldly, barely shaking Marcus's hand. I was just discussing the quarterly projections with Miss Whitmore at a charity gala. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Sounds thrilling. Elena bit back a smile, and Marcus felt a spark of triumph. If you'll excuse us, Elena said to the group, I'd like to speak with Mr. Rodriguez privately. She led Marcus toward a quieter corner of the ballroom, her heels clicking on the marble floor. How did you know I'd be here? She asked once they were alone. Your grandfather told me. Elena's eyes widened. My grandfather? You mean my father's father, but he's been dead for 10 years. No, your mother's father, Eduardo Morales. Elena's face went pale. You met Eduardo, but how did he? Why would he? She shook her head, clearly overwhelmed. Marcus, what's going on ever since you fixed my car? Everything in my life has felt turned upside down. Marcus looked into her eyes, seeing confusion and vulnerability that her elegant facade couldn't hide. There's a lot we need to talk about our families, about the past, about promises that were made 50 years ago. Promises. Before Marcus could answer, the orchestra began playing a slow waltz. Couples moved onto the dance floor, and Marcus felt a moment of panic. He'd never learned to dance properly. Would you like to dance? Elena asked softly. I should warn you, I'm not very good at this kind of dancing. Elena smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her all evening. Neither am I, actually. I learned the steps, but I never learned the feeling. Marcus offered his arm, and they moved onto the dance floor together. He placed one hand on her waist, took her hand in his other, and they began to move slowly to the music. It was awkward at first. Marcus stepped on her foot twice, and Elena was too stiff, too focused on proper form, but gradually something changed. They stopped thinking about the steps and started listening to the music, to each other. "This is better," Elena whispered, relaxing into his arms. "Much better," Marcus agreed. They danced in comfortable silence for a while, aware of the stares from other guests but not caring. Marcus could smell Elena's perfume, could feel the warmth of her hand in his, could see the way the chandelier light played across her face. "Marcus," Elena said quietly, "about what I said that day at your shop, about the marriage thing. You don't have to." "Yes, I do." She looked up at him, her eyes serious. "I've been thinking about it for days, about words having power like you said, about promises, even joking ones." Marcus's heart began to race. "Elena, I've dated a lot of men," she continued. "Rich men, successful men, men my father approved of. But I've never felt with any of them what I felt watching you work on my engine, that focus, that passion, that absolute dedication to doing something perfectly, not for money or recognition, but because it mattered. Eleanor, we barely know each other. Do we? Because it doesn't feel that way to me." She stopped dancing and looked directly into his eyes. "It feels like I've been waiting my whole life to meet you." The music swirled around them, and Marcus felt like they were the only two people in the room. "What are you saying?" Elena took a deep breath. "I'm saying that maybe my grandfather was right to send you here tonight. I'm saying that maybe some jokes aren't really jokes at all. And I'm saying that if you ask me to leave this place right now and never look back, I might just say yes." Marcus stared at her, his mind reeling. This beautiful, sophisticated woman was offering to walk away from everything she'd ever known, based on a connection neither of them fully understood. "Eleanor, your whole life is here, your family, your business, your future. My future is wherever my heart is," she said simply, "and my heart is telling me it belongs with the man who can make impossible engines run, who keeps his word even when it's inconvenient, and who dances with me like I'm the only woman in the world." The song ended, but they remained in each other's arms. "There's something else," Marcus said, "something about our grandfathers, about why this all feels like destiny." "Tell me later," Elena whispered. "Right now, just tell me one thing. If I asked you to take me away from here, would you?" Marcus looked around the ballroom at the wealth, the privilege, the world Elena had been born into. Then he looked back at her face, saw the hope and vulnerability there, and realized that none of that other stuff mattered. "Yes," he said simply. "I would." Elena smiled, and it was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. "Then ask me." Marcus and Elena walked hand in hand through the moonlit gardens behind the grand ballroom. Having quietly slipped away from the gala without saying goodbye to anyone, Elena had kicked off her expensive heels and was walking barefoot on the grass, her designer gown trailing behind her like something from a fairy tale. "I can't believe I just did that," she laughed, the sound light and free in a way Marcus had never heard before. "My father is going to kill me when he finds out I disappeared from the charity gala." "Are you regretting it?" Marcus asked, concerned. Elena stopped walking and turned to face him. "Not for a second. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." They found a bench beneath an old oak tree, and Elena sat down, gathering her skirt around her. Marcus sat beside her, still marveling at the surreal nature of the evening. "Now," Elena said, turning toward him, "tell me about our grandfathers. Tell me about this destiny you mentioned." Marcus pulled out the photograph Eduardo had given him, now slightly worn from being handled so much over the past few days. "Your grandfather gave me this." Elena studied the photo in the moonlight, her breath catching as she recognized the younger version of Eduardo Morales. "This is impossible. My grandfather never mentioned knowing anyone named Rodriguez." According to Eduardo, they were best friends and business partners 50 years ago. They had a shop together, shared everything until they had a falling out over a woman. A woman? My grandmother, Maria. They both loved her, but she chose my grandfather, Eduardo, left town in anger, and built his fortune elsewhere, but he never forgot Antonio or the friendship they'd shared. Elena was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. "That explains so much," she said finally. "My grandfather always seemed sad about something, like he was carrying some old hurt, and he taught me things about engines that he said his father had never known, techniques that came from somewhere else." "Your grandfather said you carry both bloodlines," Marcus continued. "The Whitmore business sense and the Morales mechanical intuition. Is that why I was so fascinated watching you work? Why it felt familiar? Maybe. Or maybe it's something else entirely." Marcus took her hand. Eleanor, there's something else your grandfather told me about the work I did on your engine. Elena raised an eyebrow. What about it? He said I essentially created a hybrid system that shouldn't exist for another 10 years. Technology his engineers have been trying to develop. Elena stared at him. You're joking. I'm not. He thinks I have some kind of enhanced version of what my grandfather could do, and he thinks you've been searching your whole life for something that would make you feel complete. Elena was quiet for so long that Marcus began to worry he'd said too much. Finally, she spoke. When I was little, she said softly, I used to sneak into my grandfather's workshop. He had this old car, a 1967 Mustang, that he was always working on. He'd let me hand him tools, and he'd tell me stories about engines having personalities, about listening to what they needed instead of just following repair manuals. She paused. Lost in the memory, my parents hated it. They said it wasn't appropriate for a Whitmore to be covered in grease playing with car parts, but with my grandfather, I felt alive, like I was discovering who I was supposed to be. What happened to the Mustang? He left it to me when he died. It's been sitting in storage for 10 years because no one could figure out what was wrong with it. My father's mechanics said it would cost more to repair than it was worth. Elena looked at Marcus with sudden intensity. But you could fix it, couldn't you? Marcus felt a familiar stirring, the same instinct that had driven him to attempt the impossible with Elena's Mercedes. I'd have to see it first. But, yes, I think I could. Eleanor stood up abruptly, her eyes bright with excitement. Come on, where are we going? To get my grandfather's car. I want to see if you can work the same magic twice. They drove to a storage facility on the outskirts of town, Eleanor using her key to access a climate-controlled unit that contained more than just cars. It was full of her grandfather's workshop equipment, tools and memorabilia from his mechanical days. The Mustang sat under a tarp in the center of the space. When Elena pulled away the covering, Marcus whistled low. The car was beautiful, classic lines, perfect proportions, but even in the dim light, he could see it was in bad shape. She hasn't run in 15 years, Elena said sadly. My grandfather spent the last months of his life trying to fix her, but something was wrong that he couldn't identify. Marcus popped the hood and immediately understood the problem. It wasn't mechanical, it was emotional. The engine had been worked on by too many different people with too many different approaches. It was confused, conflicted, like it didn't know what it was supposed to be. Hand me that wrench, Marcus said, rolling up his sleeves. For the next 2 hours, Elena watched Marcus work with the same focused intensity she'd witnessed at his shop, but this time she was actively helping, handing him tools, holding parts, cleaning connections. Her expensive gown got dirty. Her hair came loose from its elegant arrangement, but she didn't care. Working together felt natural, like they'd been doing it for years. Elena seemed to anticipate what Marcus needed before he asked, and Marcus found himself explaining what he was doing, sharing the mechanical intuition his grandfather had taught him. Try it now, Marcus said finally, stepping back from the engine. Eleanor slid into the driver's seat, her heart pounding. She turned the key. The Mustang roared to life with a sound that was pure music, powerful, smooth, perfect. Elena let out a whoop of joy and jumped out of the car, throwing her arms around Marcus. You did it, you brought her back. Marcus held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the warmth of her body against his. We did it, he corrected. Together. Elena pulled back to look at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Marcus, I need to tell you something. What? I love you. The words hung in the air between them. Simple and profound. Marcus felt his heart stop, then start again with a rhythm that seemed to match the Mustang's engine. Elena, I know it sounds crazy. I know we've only known each other for less than a week, but I love the way you work with your hands, the way you listen to engines like they're speaking to you, the way you keep your promises even when they're impossible. I love that you showed up at that gala tonight, even though you knew you didn't belong there. I love that you see me as more than just a rich girl who doesn't know anything about the real world. Marcus cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had started to fall. I love you too. I love your curiosity, your willingness to get your hands dirty, the way you laugh when you're truly happy. I love that you made a crazy promise, and now you're brave enough to keep it. They kissed then, surrounded by the smell of motor oil and the sound of the perfectly tuned engine, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. When they finally broke apart, Elena smiled up at him. So, she said playfully, about that marriage proposal. Marcus laughed, the sound rich and warm. Elena Whitmore, will you marry me? Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, Marcus Rodriguez. I will marry you. But as they stood there in each other's arms, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows outside the storage unit. Someone who had been following Elena all evening. Someone who had very different plans for her future. The next morning, Marcus woke up in his small apartment above the shop, wondering if the previous night had been an elaborate dream. But when he looked at his hands and saw the familiar stains of motor oil mixed with traces of Elena's lipstick on his shirt, he knew it had all been beautifully, impossibly real. His phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Meet me at the storage unit at 10 a.m. We need to talk, something's happened." Marcus's stomach dropped. In the cold light of morning, had Elena regretted everything? Had her father found out about their engagement and forbidden it? He arrived at the storage facility to find Elena already there, but she wasn't alone. Eduardo Morales stood beside the restored Mustang, running his hand along its pristine lines with tears in his eyes. "Marcus," Elena called out, her voice strained, "there's someone else here to see you." A man in an expensive suit stepped out from behind one of the storage units. Richard Whitmore, Elena's father. His face was a mask of barely controlled fury. "So you're the mechanic who thinks he can marry my daughter?" Richard said, his voice like ice. "Dad, please," Elena started. "Quiet, Elena. You've embarrassed this family enough for one lifetime." Richard turned his cold gaze back to Marcus. "Let me make something very clear, Mr. Rodriguez. My daughter is worth $50 million. She's set to inherit a business empire that took 3 generations to build. You think I'm going to let some grease monkey destroy everything we've worked for?" Marcus felt anger flare in his chest, but Eduardo stepped forward before he could respond. "Richard," Eduardo said quietly, "I think you're making a mistake. Stay out of this." "Eduardo, this is between me and the gold digger who's trying to seduce my daughter." "Gold digger?" Marcus's voice was dangerous now. "Sir, with all due respect, I never asked your daughter for anything. She's the one who proposed to me." Richard laughed bitterly. "Of course she did. Elena's always been impulsive, emotional. She has no understanding of the real world, of what people like you really want from people like us. People like me." Marcus took a step forward. "What exactly do you think you know about people like me? I know that you saw an opportunity and you took it. I know that you're probably planning to take half of everything in the divorce." Elena's face went white with fury. "That's enough," she shouted, her voice echoing through the storage facility. "How dare you speak about Marcus like that? How dare you reduce everything I feel to some kind of business transaction?" Richard's expression hardened. "Elena, you're not thinking clearly. This man has manipulated you." "Manipulated me?" Elena's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Father, for the first time in my life, I'm thinking clearly. Do you want to know what manipulation looks like? It looks like 27 years of being told that my worth is measured in dollars, that my purpose is to marry someone appropriate and produce heirs for the family business." Eduardo stepped closer to the group, his weathered face grave. "Richard, there's something you need to know. Something about why Elena and Marcus found each other. I don't want to hear any mystical nonsense about destiny." "Then hear about money," Eduardo interrupted, his voice sharp. "Because that's all you understand, isn't it?" He walked over to the Mustang and placed his hand on its hood. "This car has been broken for 15 years. I spent the last months of my son-in-law's father's life watching him try to fix it. He brought in experts, specialists, mechanics who charged thousands of dollars. None of them could even diagnose the problem." Eduardo looked directly at Richard. "Last night, Marcus not only fixed it, he made it better than it ever was, and he did it in 2 hours. So he's a good mechanic, that doesn't change." "Richard," Eduardo's voice was deadly quiet now, "do you know what Marcus did to Elena's Mercedes? The one your dealership said was completely destroyed?" Richard frowned. "Elena said it was repaired, but he created a hybrid propulsion system that my engineering team has been trying to develop for 3 years, a system that could revolutionize the automotive industry and be worth billions of dollars." Eduardo's eyes glittered with intensity. "Marcus Rodriguez isn't trying to marry into money. You fool, he is the money. He just doesn't know it yet." The storage facility fell silent except for the soft purring of the Mustang's engine. Marcus stared at Eduardo in shock. "What are you talking about?" Eduardo reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder thick with documents. "I've had my legal team working around the clock since Thursday. Patent applications, technical specifications, market analyses. The innovations you've made to both engines represent technology that could transform our entire industry." He handed the folder to Marcus. "This is a partnership offer, 50-50 split on all patents and developments. Conservative estimates put the potential value at $200 million in the first 5 years alone." Marcus's hands trembled as he opened the folder. I don't understand. I was just fixing engines. You were revolutionizing them, Eduardo corrected, and you did it with an intuition that can't be taught, only inherited, the same gift your grandfather had, but evolved for a new generation. Elena moved to Marcus's side, taking his arm. This doesn't change anything, she said firmly. I didn't fall in love with a business opportunity. I fell in love with a man who keeps his promises. Richard's face had gone from fury to confusion to something approaching respect. $200 million. Conservative estimate, Eduardo repeated, but only if Marcus agrees to the partnership, and only if he has the right support system. He looked meaningfully at Elena. The kind of support that comes from marrying someone who understands both worlds, mechanical and business. Elena squeezed Marcus's arm. What do you think? Marcus looked around at the faces watching him. Elena's hopeful. Eduardo's encouraging. Richard slowly calculating. Then he looked down at the technical papers in his hands, diagrams and specifications for innovations he'd created, without even realizing it. I think, he said slowly, that your grandfather was right about promises having power. He closed the folder and handed it back to Eduardo. But I need to make something clear to everyone here. I don't want Elena because of her money, and I don't want your partnership because of the profit potential. Richard frowned. Then what do you want? Marcus looked directly at Elena, his dark eyes intense with emotion. I want to wake up every morning next to the woman I love. I want to build something meaningful with my hands and my heart. I want to honor the friendship our grandfathers should have had and create the legacy they would have been proud of. He turned to Richard. Sir, I understand your concerns about your daughter's future, but I'm not asking you to trust me because of money or business potential. I'm asking you to trust me because I love Elena more than anything in this world, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving that she made the right choice. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Marcus, and as for the partnership, Marcus continued, looking at Eduardo, I accept not because of the money, but because it feels like the right way to honor what our grandfather started, but with one condition. What condition? Eduardo asked. Marcus smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. We teach Elena everything we know. She's got the instinct, the passion, and the curiosity. It's time she learned the technical skills to match, Elena gasped. You mean it? Every word. We'll be partners in everything, business, marriage, and the garage. Richard stood quietly for a long moment, watching the interaction between his daughter and this young man who'd appeared in their lives like a force of nature. Finally he spoke. Elena, he said quietly, are you absolutely certain about this? Elena looked at her father, then at Marcus, then at the restored Mustang that represented so much more than just a repaired engine. Dad, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Richard nodded slowly. Then I suppose I should welcome my future son-in-law to the family. Eduardo clapped his hands together, his face breaking into a huge grin. Wonderful, and now there's one more surprise. He walked over to a tarp-covered corner of the storage unit and pulled away the covering, revealing an old photograph blown up to poster size. It showed Antonio Rodriguez and Eduardo Morales standing in front of their original shop, their arms around each other's shoulders, both wearing huge smiles. At the bottom of the photo, in faded ink, were two signatures and a handwritten note. Brothers in engines and in heart. May our children's children finish what we started. They knew, Eduardo said softly. Somehow they knew that this day would come. Elena moved to stand beside Marcus, taking his hand. So what happens now? Marcus looked around at the restored Mustang, the partnership documents, the family that was accepting him despite all odds, and the woman he loved beyond reason. Now, he said, his voice filled with wonder and certainty, we build the future together. 6 months later, Rodriguez Morales Automotive Innovation held its grand opening in a gleaming new facility that combined the practical wisdom of 2 generations with the cutting-edge technology of tomorrow. Elena, now Elena Rodriguez, stood beside her husband as they unveiled their first commercial hybrid engine, based on the innovations Marcus had first discovered while keeping an impossible promise. In the audience, Richard Whitmore and Eduardo Morales sat side by side, both men finally understanding that some promises transcend time, social class, and even death itself. And in the parking lot outside, a silver Mercedes and a restored Mustang sat side by side, their engines purring in perfect harmony, the sound of destiny fulfilled